Will up? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the news. In politics, Senator Barack Obama's election campaign for US presidency is picking up steam. The novel use of so-called social media allows for him to make inroads, especially with the younger and more tech-savvy parts of the population. Political observers speculate that use of such internet platforms will become much more common in the near future as websites like MySpace or Facebook are taken up by the common population. After French bank BNP Paribas blocked withdrawals of 3 hedge funds last month to their, quote, complete evaporation of liquidity, investors and savers are attempting to liquidate assets deposited in highly leveraged financial institutions. Now, the British bank Northern Rock requested security from the Bank of England. The first observers are starting to talk about a possible upcoming financial crisis, which may originate in the United States housing market. It appears that this market is mostly backed by weak loans. In technology, Microsoft's new Windows Vista operating system is heavily criticized as being too slow on older computers and pushing people to upgrade to newer models. The hardware industry, on the other hand, defends this as an investment in progress. Apple Computer, the highly acclaimed producer of the iPod, is making inroads into the mobile phone market with its so-called iPhone. Global market leader Nokia, however, states that they do not see this as a threat, citing their extensive experience and the superiority of hardware keys compared to the iPhone's touch-sensitive display. Python 3000, the new version of the popular Python programming language, has seen its first release. As this version breaks compatibility with the current Python 2, it will be interesting to watch the uptake of the new version as users migrate their code bases. The developers of the programming language, however, expect a speedy uptake, fueled by demand for the powerful new features. Staying with programming languages, the Yet Another Perl conference, EU, in Vienna, has been a large success, with talks about the upcoming successor to the Perl programming language picking up interest. Now, it's been 9 years since those headlines, and a lot has changed in that time. Perl 6 has seen 3 attempts at implementation, and one of them, Rakudo, has even been successful enough for us to gain confidence in the language to declare the first stable release. And Python? Python 3 is still trying to win developers. There are still more Python 2 developers out there than those using Python 3. There are still lots more Python 2 code than code written in Python 3. There are kids out there who haven't even been born when the first Python 3 release was made, and who are nevertheless already getting into programming computers. Now, personally, I don't really care all that much about Python, but when I see a mistake, being one of the many of my own, or someone else's, I usually try to learn from it. And what I learned from the Python 3 disaster is simple. Please, let's not repeat it. For 15 years, a lot of people have regarded Perl 6 as the programming language that has never been released and that will probably never be released. Well, they could even easily have been right. Well, it's now written history that they have been wrong. Perl 6 is finally here, and it's here to stay. It doesn't matter if you love it, or hate it, or just don't care. Perl 6 is a permanent part of the Perl community now. There's no point, however, in hiding the fact that this brings a new set of challenges. By its very nature as a completely new language that tries to learn from mistakes instead of repeating them, Perl 6 has already caused controversy. by being backwards incompatible, it forced people to pick a side. You were either one of the Perl 6 crazies with the high floating visions about how to recreate the whole world, or you were one of the Perl 5 programmers and maintainers who tried to keep their businesses up and fight the marketing battle against the naysayers and the Perl is dead people. And for a time it looked dire. There was quite some hostility between the two sides. Thankfully, we have since overcome them and found some state of peaceful coexistence. There's even been some exchange of ideas going on. But all in all, the sides are quite clearly kept apart still. One outcome of this exchange of ideas has been sane and powerful meta-object protocols, both in Perl 5 and Perl 6. Just imagine what we could still gain by an even more free flow of ideas. When instead of being content with living side by side, we would actually live together. Well, I for one would love to live in such a future. We will not get there overnight, so much is clear. But I can show you today one important step into this direction. This step will remove the most divisive decision you had to make previously. The question of whether you want to use the powerful new language or the massive amounts of pre-existing code. My goal for today is that after this talk, you will be able to go out and give Perl 6 a try. That missing modules or existing code bases no longer keep you from experiencing this great new language. Or if you consider yourself to be a 6er already, that you will no longer restrict yourself to what's already available in Perl 6. Because as Perl programmers, we usually are not content with just having our cake. We really want to eat it too. So how do I want to accomplish that? Well, in one of the YAPC talks I've seen, I've learned about native call. Native call is Perl 6's way to access system libraries. Think of Perl 5's access, but without all the horror that comes to mind, without the nightmares of C macro soup. Instead, native call is actually beautiful. Have a look at this. This is all pure Perl 6 code. Just like that, you can have Perl 6 load a native library for you and call one of the functions the library provides. You do not even have to have a C compiler installed to do this. And when I saw this, it got me thinking. The Perl 5 interpreter is also provided as a system library. If I can use native call to load Perl 5 and use Perl 5's embedding interface, then, in theory, I should be able to build a bridge. And literally within an hour of having this idea, I finished my very first Perl 6 program. This program used native call to load Perl 5 and run a hello world that was written in Perl 5. And as hello world would have been kind of an awkward name for a module, instead I called it inline Perl 5. A couple of days later, I already could use DBI, quickly followed by DBX class. And I was like, wow, you're really onto something here. Now, this was a great start. But if I wanted to use Perl 6 in our projects at work, I'd have to ascend a much larger mountain. We use the Catalyst framework at work for pretty much all our projects. So to be able to use Perl 6, I'd have to use this from within a Catalyst-based project. And this is where we start looking at some code, because that's what we're here for. Catalyst creates a startup script for you to run your application on a Perl-based web server. Such a script may look like this. This is a very straightforward Perl script. It's just basically loading a module and calling a method that does all the real work. How could we port this to Perl 6? Well, looking at the first line, I just replaced Perl by Perl 6. Then setting the environment variable is just different syntax, but otherwise the same. Then we use inline Perl 5. We create a P5 object representing the Perl 5 interpreter, and we call its run method, giving it a single string argument as a here dot. Now, inline Perl 5 also has a use method that really does just the same as a use statement in Perl 5. It's basically just sugar, so you don't have to use some evil thing just to load a module. Then there's the invoke method, which lets you call methods on a package or object. You just give it your package or object and some additional arguments. Of course, the method may have one or more return values. And those get returned by invoke, just like you'd expect it to. This quick example uses Perl 5's petal templating module. We just create a new template object, and then we feed it some data in the form of a hash containing strings or lists. The method then returns a string, which we can print. And as we can see, it's certainly possible to use Perl 5 modules in Perl 6. But would you really want to program like that? It could certainly look much nicer. It could, it can, and it does. But it turns out Perl 6 is already designed to accommodate interoperation with other languages. It allows for modules to plug into the use mechanism. With this, we can get rid of all the P5 object entirely and literally just use Perl 5 modules, just like we're used to. And even more, you do not even have to load inline Perl 5 yourself, because Perl 6, the specification, already mandates Perl 5 support. And Rakudo, the Perl 6 implementation, knows that inline Perl 5 can provide this support. So as long as you have inline Perl 5 installed, Rakudo will just load it automatically for you. Well, when you use a Perl 5 module like that, inline Perl 5 automatically creates a corresponding Perl 6 package for you, including wrappers for all functions and methods. Now, what if such a wrapper is actually wrapping a constructor? Well, they do what constructors do. They return objects. And with this, you can just call a constructor as if the module was a real native Perl 6 class. The wrappers underneath will still just invoke the invoke method like we've seen in earlier examples. Again, this is complete and working code. Now for some real science fiction. What I've shown you so far allows you to use a large number of CPAN modules already. However, some of them expect you to subclass them. Basic bot or HTML parser would be examples. These inheritance-based APIs usually expect you to implement some methods. So how do we subclass a Perl 6 class, a Perl 5 class in Perl 6? Well, it turns out you do just the same as with any ordinary plain Perl 6 class. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. Inline Perl 5 creates a shadow class in Perl 6 for the package you load in Perl 5. You can just use this shadow class as the base class for your subclass. The base class will still delegate all method calls to the underlying Perl 5 class. And when you do override methods, they are really exactly what you would expect them to be. We have methods and signatures, and we can call other methods, probably provided by our base class, like reply or shutdown in this example. Starting our little IRC bot is just a matter of copy and paste from the documentation, modulo some syntax changes. And that's it. Now, HTML parser looks rather similar to what I've just shown. In fact, it's just again some copy and paste with changed names. Again, we subclass the generated wrapper class. And we implement methods. I very much like this result, especially with Perl 6's method signatures. It just makes everything look quite clean. Now, if you've used HTML parser before, you might throw in that HTML parser does not exactly require you to subclass it. You could also pass it some code references which handle the parse events. And by code references, I really mean that. HTML parser's access implementation is rather inflexible and would, for example, not accept callable objects. And HTML parser is not the only module with this issue. So inline Perl 5 nowadays really gives you that, a plain, normal code reference, if you pass it a callable from Perl 6. Thus, even HTML parser will be happy. And again, I could really just do what its documentation told me to do. Now, I fully realize that we are at the Dancer conference, so I suppose Dancer is what you're really interested in. And I guess what I've shown you so far is nice, but those were relatively simple, those examples, and probably handpicked to the stuff I know which works. So a complex web framework like Dancer 2 is written by people who actually know a lot about Perl, and so it must be a completely different beast. But just for fun, let's see how far we come. Now this is kind of the canonical Hello World in Dancer 2, taken straight out from its tutorial. So this is so simple, it might actually be simple enough to run it. And of course I wouldn't show it to you unless I actually tried it. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and do my first live demo in years. So let's see. Okay. I'm going to just start this tiny PL6, which is just the code I've shown you. And I switch to my web browser and hit enter. Oh, something went wrong.
It's okay, it's an answer to error message.
Well, what we can see here, there's a route exception. Too many positionals passed. Expected 0 arguments, but got 1. What the hell happened? Well, the documentation doesn't tell you this, but Dancer 2 actually passes the application object to your handler routine. Now, since Perl 6 does have proper subroutine signatures, it expects you to declare parameters and complains if arguments were passed but none were expected. That's what the error message told you. So what could we do to make Perl 6 happy? Of course, we could just give it a proper signature and declare this argument. But that's kind of tedious and it's less pretty, and really, we cannot have that, can we? Luckily, Tajik, who first tried this at the German Perl workshop this year, found a really pretty way around this issue. In Perl 6, a code block is not just a syntactic element. It's really a first-class object. You can think of subroutines as code blocks with signatures. If you view it from that point of view, it's only natural that naked code blocks without signatures don't care about arguments. So, in a way, they're actually closer to Perl 5 subroutine references than subroutines in Perl 6 are. Now, with this, if you just give it a code block without the sub and without any signatures, it will happily accept anything you give it. So it's actually a bit prettier than the Perl 5 example itself, which is important. Now, the Dancer 2 tutorial, of course, does not stop there with this trivial example, and neither did I when I prepared this talk. So let's have a look at a larger example, a minimalistic block implementation. Well, I'm not going to show you the full source code, that would just be boring. But a couple of interesting bits to point out. I do stick quite closely to the tutorial. So I do use Perl 5's DBI and template toolkit. One of the little improvements in Perl 6 that matters so much in daily programming life is that, for example, file specs functionality is integrated into the language. So instead of calling file spec tempdir, I can just use the tempdir variable. And this gives you an IO path object that has a child method. So getting a platform-independent path into some temp directory is quite easy and pretty. As I mentioned, I use DBI, which of course all of you know. So this will look quite familiar to you, but also a little bit strange. Well, first of all, undef is gone in Perl 6. Even undefined values are typed. And the closest to a bare undef in Perl 6 is an undefined any. And what the hell is this dollar curly brace thingy there? Well, it's an itemized hash. In other words, it's a hash that should be treated as a single item. And that's the important part, not flattened. Especially not into the argument list of the method we call. And lastly, this slide shows how to access global Perl 5 variables from within Perl 6 with this Perl 5 hash there.
Pretty.
Don't tempt me to make this pretty. Well, onto a more mundane piece of code, the before template render hook, which we have heard quite a lot about this morning. As you know, probably much better than me, this is just a sub that gets past a hash in which we can store additional values. So this is really just translated syntax. Now, a quick show of hands, please. How many of you have forgotten to add the semicolon at the end of the subroutine? It happens to me all the time with things like this or moves method modifiers. Well, the good news is, and I'm so glad, Perl 6 has fixed this for us. Turns out the Perl 6 parser is smart enough to actually know that this must be the end of the statement. So it doesn't care if you put a semicolon there or not. I love this. So, now this is the heart of our program, the code that actually delivers the page. The only specialty really is this strange map thingy here. So, what is this about? Well, when we pass a hash from Perl 6 code to Perl 5, you would expect that writes to this hash on the Perl 5 side would be visible on the Perl 6 side. And that's really the case now. But the implementation is done by tying a Perl 5 hash to the Perl 6 hash. So that the gist is this makes every access to this hash quite slow. And then so accesses this hash a lot. So this is really visible in benchmarks. Now, maps are immutable hashes in Perl 6. And since they are immutable, and we don't expect to find any writes anyway, we can get away with just copying the contents of the map onto a real Perl 5 hash. So this is really just a way to speed this thing up. Now, the final piece of the answer code I'm going to show you is this bit. It's nothing out of the ordinary here. In fact, it's actually closer to what the dancer documentation suggests to do than what the tutorial actually shows you. I'm talking about using the body parameters function instead of parent. And why do you do this? Well, other than this being the recommended way anyway, there's a reason, and that is that param is context sensitive. And Perl 6 does not have this concept of context. Now, because it doesn't have this context sensitivity, inline Perl 5 calls every Perl 5 function in list context, which is just because this is the most general. Body parameters, on the other hand, always returns a scalar, so this is what I use. Okay, so with the knowledge we have now, we can use most of CPAN already. So, is this the time to call it a success and go have some coffee? I could really use one. No, I still like to pick my goals a bit higher than that. I'm not just looking for a treasure, I'm looking for the grail. I'm going for the big ones, and to me that means catalyst, that means DBX class, not just DBI. I want to do this. And if I'm starting to bore you already, I'd consider this a good thing because you paid attention. Because I'm showing you the same trick for the 4th time now. It's use some module from Perl 5. So why am I making this fuss? Why do I talk about Grail? Well, while using a DBX class schema is rather straightforward, wouldn't it be really cool if you could actually write one in Perl 6? Well, of course, since schema classes are just created by calling a couple of methods on the base class, this is not exactly special. But I'm lazy, and I'm really hoping that you're too. So what I really want is to have the schema class created by dbigdumper and then extended by Perl 6 code. But dbigdumper creates Perl 5 code, and we can surely not just add some Perl 6 code and it will kind of work, can we? Well, the top half of the slide is just plain normal dbigdumper generated code, including comments and checksums. Instead of just adding methods written in Perl 5, we used a special package called v6 inline. And by using this package, we declare that the rest of the file is in fact written in Perl 6. And indeed, here we find the full title method that I was using in an earlier example. This method just uses the generated accessors that dbig provides. Now, the bit to explain here is the rest of the v6 inline line. So constructors, new and inflate result. Well, what happens is that inline Perl 5 automatically creates a subclass for us in Perl 5. This subclass is then used as the base class of, with the same name as the class we're in on the Perl 6 side. And this class is where the Perl 6 methods will be added to. Now, when we create an object, we want this to be of the Perl 6 class, not of the Perl 5 class. But we are not the ones who create these objects. This is some dbig code somewhere else. And this does not know about all this Perl 6 stuff. Now, to achieve that, we have to wrap the constructors and redirect them to the Perl 6 class. And since constructors can have arbitrary names in Perl, inline Perl 5 cannot just guess them, so we have to tell it. And in the case of a dbx class result source, the names are new and inflate result. So, are you convinced yet that we can use the awesome and power of this fully armed and operational battle station that is CPAN? Well, I'm still not done yet. Because if you are like me, at some point you will ask the question, how Perl 6's threading features work with Perl 5? And the answer is somewhat. You can create multiple independent Perl 5 interpreters and use them in different threads. Now, those interpreters will not see each other. They're completely separated. And will start out in a blank slate. So, however, you can plug them together on the Perl 6 side and push values around between them. And in fact, if you replace Perl 6 in this description by another Perl 5 interpreter, you get exactly what iThreads does. iThreads has this hidden Perl 5 interpreter that does all the moving around of shared variables. As far as stability goes, this is actually better than I expected, but not yet something I would really suggest using in production. But it's fun to play around with in any case. Now, so far we've only tried accessing Perl 5 code from Perl 6. For me, that's really just not good enough, because if I want to bring both languages together, that means both directions. And in other words, we need a bridge back. This bridge is called inline Perl 6. I told you earlier that Perl 5 is embeddable and that I used it as a basis for inline Perl 5. Now, Rakudo, or to be more precise, MoreVM, isn't. But I did it anyway. I just hope that we can get a real embedding interfaces one of these days, so we can get rid of a lot of copied C code. Now, on this slide, you can see 3 ways to have Perl 6 say hello world for you. You always start by loading inline Perl 6 and initializing it. Then we use one of the functions that are all prefixed by v6 : run is, well, again, just for some evaluating some code. Then there's a call again to call any named function. And there's invoke to, surprise, call a method. There are a couple of questions that this slide may raise. First, if you look in the middle, there's this global : in front of the MyStrip. The reason for this is that in Perl 6, everything, including class definitions, are lexical by default. So if we left out the global : then this MyStrip class would only be visible within the eval itself, which is not that useful. Then when invoking the new method, I need to pass named parameters, because that's how Perl 6 constructors work by default. But Perl 5 does not have this concept of named parameters. And this is also the reason why I need to run the initialize in the begin block, because this v6 name sub here would otherwise need to have parentheses around the arguments, and it wouldn't be as pretty again. So would no longer be as nice. So you may still remember this little script. It's the dbx class example I showed earlier, where I wrote part of the result set class in Perl 6. With the help of inline Perl 6, we can still use the schema, including the Perl 6 extension. In fact, I'm quite confident in telling you that you can use every single feature of inline Perl 5 in inline Perl 6. And why is that? Well, it's really just because inline Perl 6 itself doesn't actually do all that much. It really just loads MoreVM and Rakudo and inline Perl 5. It then tells inline Perl 5 to use the already running Perl 5 interpreter instead of starting one of its own. And it tricks MoreVM into thinking that it's actually just doing a callback. And that's why we have all the power of inline Perl 5 still available. And yes, you really can have a Perl 6 module that's using a Perl 5 module, and then use the whole thing from within Perl 5 again. So, so after 15 years of growing apart, our code bases can finally grow together again. The Perl community speaks in many languages, be it Perl 5, or regular expressions, or C, or Perl 6, or formats, or grammars. We speak in many languages, but it's always the same voice. It's the voice you can hear walking around during coffee breaks at conferences like this. It's the tiny, quiet little voice at the back of your head that says, we are one. We are the Perl community. Because whatever the arguments, whatever the opinions, whatever your preferences are, at the end of the day, as long as it gets the job done and you have fun doing it, it doesn't matter which part of the toolbox we use. As long as we recognize this singular truth, that we are one. Thank you. Any questions? There's one very obvious.
Did it actually work? I didn't see it right.
Okay, I can show you that. Oh, close it on the other one. Yes. It could use a bit more contrast. Wait. Yeah, so that's it. There's another question I'm waiting for. Well, I've talked about this map thingy to speed things up, so the obvious question is, how slow is it? Well, I've used this block thingy and benchmarked it. First thing I noticed is, whoa, the answer is fast. This is excellent. I have to use it more often. So it can push out with 6 entries, it pushes out 1,000 requests in 1.4 seconds in the pure Perl 5 version. It takes about 6 seconds on the Perl 6 version. So we're talking about a slowdown of about 4.9 times or something. Which may sound a lot, but on the other hand, it still takes about a millisecond to render. So how many cases are there where this actually matters? I know some of you work at companies where speed is everything, and that's okay, but let's face it, most projects are not like that. You can run the Dancer conference website on this and nobody will notice. Also, this is kind of a minimalistic example, and it does a lot of calls back and forth. Like I said, I use Perl 5's DBI. I don't have to do this. I could use a database interface from Perl 6, so I stay longer in the Perl 6 part of the whole program, and it would probably perform a bit better.
Another point to this is that once you actually have a more serious application, you'll be doing way more things that are not just making the request and parsing it. So that
exactly, yes.
Your actual application will be much bigger, and that is where you'll be spending your time.
You will probably still spend your time mostly in database queries.
Yes, exactly.
Like most web applications.
Once you have an actual web application, it will be very clear that that is the smallest database.
Yeah.
How well does inheritance work in terms of layering? So can you have a Perl 5 class which inherits from a Perl 6 class, which inherits from a Perl 5?
Not yet.
Not yet.
The inheriting in Perl 5 from a Perl 6 part is one that no one, to my knowledge, has tried yet, and I haven't, so I have not implemented anything to enable it, but it's one of the things I really want to try out these days.
Because, like, for example, in the DBAC test suite, there is a single file which has one method, and all the rest of the tests inherit from that. So, can't use the reading process.
So that would be a very good reason for me to just dig into it and figure out how we could actually inherit in Perl 5 from Perl 6. What's that?
If you say use DBI from Perl 5 in the Perl 6 program, and then call some Perl 5 code, which in turn uses DBI natively in Perl 5, is there some problem with this two DBIs?
No, not at all. Should
Perl 6 didn't to the router. Like all the calls onto the Perl 5 version.
I can't think of anything that should go wrong there.
It's an API namespace, but if you say then DBI connect or something, then expect the Perl 6 thing to just forward and connect call. It's just a proxy.
Well, it's hard to say from this distance now without a concrete code example. Good thing to mention, if you run into anything interesting, like I want to do this DBI here and DBI here, and run into some issue, or I want to inherit in Perl 5 from a Perl 6 class, just go on the Perl 6 IRC channel and find me there. I'm very much interested in such use cases and in enabling them. My mission is to really remove the barrier. So whatever you think you need in your daily practice, if it's tedious to use right now, I want to make it better. So what other questions are there? Well, then, again, thank you very much. Yeah, that's it.